Nothing in the Lou Brydges Show is intended to be legal analysis, legal advice, or legal recommendations that would be applicable to your particular situation. Everyone in foreclosure or underwater with their mortgage are encouraged to seek legal counsel for a review of your specific situation. Welcome to the weekly broadcast of the Lou Brydges Show, telling the truth about the foreclosure crisis and the greatest financial crime in history that created it. Are you in foreclosure, at risk of foreclosure, or underwater with your mortgage? Do you know someone who is? Every week on this show, you'll get real answers from a real attorney. Lou Brydges will explain options in the foreclosure process. He'll talk about defective mortgages, mortgage restructuring, loan modification, short sale negotiation, and discuss what to look for when choosing a foreclosure defense attorney. Lou is an experienced foreclosure defense lawyer on the front lines of mortgage defense and litigation. Lou is dedicated to helping you keep your property. And now it's time for the Lou Brydges Show and the truth about foreclosure. Here's your host, Lou Brydges.
Good morning, Chicago. Another beautiful Saturday morning here. And I'm Lou Brydges with the Lou Brydges Show here. We've got Mike Main, my wingman.
Good morning, Chicago.
Debbie Schreiber, our producer, who just celebrated a birthday. And everyone, happy birthday to Debbie. And the greatest financial crime spree in history continues. If you've been watching the news this week, it's coming more and more every week now. This past week, Julie Schmidt reports in USA Today that the foreclosure settlement, the $3.6 billion that the major banks servicing mortgages paid to borrowers for the abuses of the foreclosure process and servicing of mortgages, it turned out to be a $3.6 billion bust. The payouts meant to close the books on the economic catastrophe that staggered millions of households has instead reignited feelings of anger and frustration. Because people are asking, what exactly did you do wrong about the servicing and foreclosure of my mortgage? And that's exactly some of the discovery that we've been propounding in the cases we have. Because basically what the banks admitted is that they had been perpetrating frauds upon the court, and yet they agreed with the Office of Comptroller of the Currency, which is, of course, everyone knows their in-house, supposedly our representative, supposedly our regulator, but is controlled by the banks and gives the banks a free pass on everything. Not a free pass, but the $3.6 billion, when you think about it, you divide it by time between the number of homeowners that were affected, and it comes to about $2,000 per homeowner at most. And actually, most of the checks are averaging about $500. But we've had a number of clients that receive checks for as much as $2,000. But basically what they're saying here is that, we perpetrated a fraud upon the court. We wrongfully foreclosed upon your house. We sabotaged the modification efforts that we agreed with the government to pursue. We sabotaged the HAMP program. You lost your house, but here's $2,000. I hope you're happy. And
why aren't you happy?
Yeah. Well, yeah, why aren't you happy? Well, the thing is you've lost your house. $3.4 billion paid out to 3.9 million homeowners, so that comes to about $1,000 per homeowner. So far, the payouts are far from closing the books on the economic catastrophe. Reignited feelings of anger and frustration, because what has happened here is, but people need to understand, and why we have this show, is the entire mortgage industry, the Wall Street investment banks and the 12 major banks that service mortgages. And again, I want to emphasize, we're not talking about your local mom and pop banks, your Harris Bank or your Bank Financial or all your local Illinois banks that were squeezed out of the mortgage industry by these major bank servicers. We're talking about the 12 major banks: the Wells Fargo, Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, Citi, U.S. Bank, Deutsche Bank, German Bank. We're talking about those major banks that are the servicers of the mortgage. They do not own one single one of these mortgages. They are the servicer. They are the servicer either for Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or the servicer for the private securitized trust, which is about 50% each. But what these major banks did in conjunction with the Wall Street investment banks is they, first of all, duped Americans into 51 million Americans into signing mortgages for their homes for far more than the home is worth. They artificially inflated the cost, not the value, the cost of American real estate by 131% over 10-year period from 1998 to 2008, thereby creating $5.5 trillion of illusory capital that they converted into cash by selling it to investors and getting government guarantees. And then, and the way they got homeowners to sign this was a series of fraudulent, unlawful activities, violations of the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, violations of the Truth in Lending Act, the manipulated appraisals, failures to disclose information to homeowners, false promises to homeowners. I mean, there was one that advertised on Chicago radio for many years. He said, I'll get you a 0% mortgage, and in 2 years when the interest rate kicks in, we'll get you another 0% mortgage, and the value of your home will have gone up 20%, and you'll be able to cash out. And, you know, this is all unlawful activity. And now it is continuing in the foreclosure and in the sabotage of the modification. 6 whistleblowers, and they all gave affidavits, 6 whistleblowers from Bank of America this past week, all gave affidavits and testified in depositions that they were told to lie to customers. They were told to lie to customer owners about the progress of their modification efforts. They were told basically to sandbag them, and they were given bonuses for putting the homeowners back into foreclosure. Now, anyone who has tried to get a modification of their mortgage knows exactly what they're talking about. They're saying right now, oh, really? What a surprise. Because you got the runaround. You were told the documents were lost. These whistleblowers, I've read these affidavits, and none of these applications for modification were ever looked at. Not a one of them. They were piled up in a corner, and then about once a month they went through and they'd grab a bunch of them and they just would send out rejections. Or what else they did was they would call people and say, you've been temporarily approved. Make your temporary payments for 6 months or 9 months or whatever, and then you'll get a permanent modification. So homeowners would religiously make their payments on time, and then 6 months or 9 months later, they would be told, you've been declined for a permanent modification. Well, what took 6 months or 9 months to decide whether you get a permanent modification or not? I mean, were they going to base it on your track record? No, nobody was tracking any of that. I have not found one. We don't have one client that was ever approved for a permanent modification after a temporary modification. So if you think if they're, sandbagging you by telling you you're going to get a temporary modification, everything's going to be okay, watch out. Because many times what happens is they then get a letter. Many times the letter is dated like within a day or two of the lawsuit of the foreclosure sale having been approved. They get a letter saying your application for permanent modification has been denied. And then they get another letter saying that your home has been sold at auction. You have 30 days to move out. So this is called sandbagging, or there's other names for it that I can't repeat on the radio, but that's what the banks use the modification efforts for, was to sandbag people. And the fact is, if you're underwater, which there's another government spokesman said today, there are still about 20 million American families underwater. There's about 55 million mortgages, family residential mortgages in this country. About 40% of those 20 million are underwater. That is, they owe more on the property than it's worth. Now, if you're significantly underwater, then some would say that it's financially foolish to continue to pay the mortgage. Others would say it's effing stupid, because when you're underwater and you're paying something, you're paying for as much as $1,000 typically more per month than you should on your mortgage. And this wasn't the result of any unfortunate cyclical downturn in the real estate market. There was no downturn in the real estate market. There was a correction. Real estate costs in this country cost of residential homes in this country have been artificially inflated by these Wall Street banks, manipulating the financial system in conjunction with the Office of Control of the Currency and the Fed, which is a revolving door with these banks. That was what another senator pointed out in some hearings today. He said the Office of Control of the Currency is no longer a regulator on behalf of the people. It's an in-house puppy dog for the banks. It's a revolving door. People work at OCC for a few years, and then they go work for these major banks, and then they go back to OCC, and the same thing with the Fed. And that is why the banks are taking over this country. Now, I won't want to go through the first segment without reading the Thomas Jefferson quote, because he warned us about this. In 1802, Jefferson wrote, "In light of the current financial crisis, I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. If the American people ever allow the banks to control the issue of currency, the banks and the corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of all their property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their forefathers conquered." Well, people, that is what's happening in this country today. But there is a movement afoot. There is a movement afoot to stop this. And you can be a part of it. And part of it is going to be, you got to just stand up and say, we're not going to take it anymore. Now, we're going to have to break a little bit for sports and weather, and I want Mike to give you some of the information about the websites and the Facebook page. And I want to thank all the listeners for all the positive feedback. This show is beyond my wildest expectations in popularity. We're talking, hoping to go into syndication soon and spread the word around the country. Mike?
Okay, the telephone number is 224-513-1231. That's 224-513-1231. We'll give you a free consultation. If you have questions for the show, as well, our Facebook page, facebook.com/The Lou Brydges Show. That's Bridges with a Y. And as well, our corporate website is Fight Illinois Foreclosures with an S.
And never give up the land. Fight for truth and justice.
Welcome back to the Lou Brydges Show with Lou Brydges, one of Chicago's leading foreclosure defense attorneys. Here's Lou to tell you what to look for when hiring a foreclosure defense attorney and how to avoid being conned on AM 560. The Answer.
Welcome back to the Lou Brydges Show. I was talking about the report by Julie Schmidt in the USA Today, talking about the negotiated settlement that the banks agreed with their in-house puppy dog supposed regulator, the Office of Comptroller of the Currency. And basically, a lot of these settlements are, to try to deflect scrutiny from Congress. But Congress is looking into, and, $3.6 billion sounds like a lot of money, but you divide that between these 12 bank servicers, and you consider how much they've stolen from the American public, and it's like finding somebody who's robbed a bank of $100,000, like giving him a $100 fine. And then hoping that he won't do it again. And, he certainly would say, boy, a $100 fine. Well, I'm certainly never going to do that again. But the truth is that these about two-thirds of the recipients of this $3.6 billion got $300. Fewer than 1,200 got the maximum amount of $125,000, and the rest fell into one of 10 categories where they received between $400 and $7,500. How exactly the individual borrower's compensation was determined is just one of the many questions that's being asked about the settlement's design and fairness. Regulators, some critical details about the settlement remain a mystery to the public and even to Congress, including how many foreclosure errors were discovered. And what exactly were these errors? Well, I'll tell you what these errors were because I've been handling foreclosure defense in the courts for 5 years. They are frauds upon the court. They are fabricated documents, robo-signed documents, missing documents, forged documents, and banks foreclosing when they aren't the servicer, and sabotaging modification efforts, the courts are more and more beginning to not just rubber stamp. Even in Cook County, the courts aren't just rubber stamping anymore the foreclosures by the banks, although that was certainly the practice for a long time and is still the practice in some of the judges. But they have to start to listen because, the truth cannot be suppressed forever. The truth is always ridiculed at first, and then it's opposed, and then it's accepted as self-evident. Somebody once said about the truth, and certainly the judges in Cook County were for a long time ridiculing the truth. Those are us defense attorneys that were saying that the bank doesn't have standing, that there's been a failed securitization, that there's been all these affirmative defenses that should be recognized. They tried to ridicule us. They would make fun of us in court and laugh at us and try to intimidate some of our younger attorneys. But we hung in there. We kept fighting away. And now it's, hey, you know what? You don't mean to be arrogant or something, but hey, we were right. You were wrong. And as it turns out, you being wrong meant that about 1 million Americans were wrongfully foreclosed on their home. 1 million. I think it's up to 2 million now Americans have been wrongfully foreclosed. And there's still another 20 million who are underwater. And the government analyst who announced today that the way things are going, with 20 million Americans underwater in the next 5 to 7 years, there could be another 6 to 7 million American families who will be foreclosed and be dispossessed of their home. And there's areas of this country where it's really getting bad. I would go down to King County, Florida, in the Fort Myers, Cape Coral area. Entire subdivisions are vacant. The entire, 200 homes in a subdivision, there's not one home occupied. There's graffiti, there's grass growing, there's mold, it's in Florida, there's lizards in the houses. Meanwhile, in the mornings, if you get up and you go down Motel Row, that's where all the school buses go. the Motel Row and the Walmart parking lots. And that's the way it's going to spread around this country if Americans don't stand up and start demanding truth and justice in their court systems, because the foreclosure, I've got some news for you, can be contested. Now, what we do at my firm, the Scotto and I put together a team of people. We have attorneys, young attorneys, experienced attorneys. We have paralegals. We have investigators and intake personnel. And we adopt a broad front approach. We are going to, depending on your situation, we're going to explore the modification if you're not underwater, explore a modification with a restructuring, that is a reduction of principal balance if you are underwater. And we are going to pursue all the government programs, all the bank programs that they've agreed to implement in response to government regulatory efforts. There are Illinois Hardest Hit. There's the HAMP program, and many of the banks had instituted modification programs. But we have one caveat. We are looking for a fair mortgage based on the truth. What is this home truly worth in today's market? And what was it always truly worth? Because most of these appraisals, as it turns out, were manipulated by the originators of the mortgage, who were trying to get a commission for as much as they could, and the originators were being encouraged to just produce mortgages for larger and larger amounts. Because again, the producers, those who are bundling and packaging the mortgages, are selling them off. In fact, they're already been sold off. The mortgage that if you had signed a mortgage between 1998 and 2008 that was securitized, that mortgage had been sold before you signed the papers. They needed to come up with that mortgage because they had sold a mortgage for, they had sold 2,500 mortgages for a particular mortgage-backed security. And they needed to come out with those 2,500 mortgages like right away for as much as possible. So that is why there was so much, unlawful and deceptive conduct on the part of the originators. They were being compelled to do this by those who were bundling and packaging the mortgages, which included those who were going to service the mortgages, which are the major banks today. You see, there's a lot of money being made in servicing mortgages in foreclosure. I've told you before, the report's documented and absolutely factual. Wells Fargo makes $10 per mortgage for performing mortgages. They service 7 million mortgages. $10 times 7 million is $70 million per month. If 1 million of those mortgages are in foreclosure, they charge $300 for each one of those mortgages. That's $300 million on that million alone, and $60 million on the other $6 million. Comes to a total of $360 million. The difference between $360 million and $70 million is about $300 million. Times 12 months is $3.6 billion of revenue from servicing foreclosed mortgages in foreclosure. That is why this bank, Wells Fargo, and all the other banks have been sabotaging the modification efforts. But there is a growing number of people in the courtrooms, in the Attorney General's office. Our own Lisa Madigan is onto this and is doing doing fine work. Eric Schneiderman in New York, the Attorney General in New York, and there's members of Congress that are onto this. And there is, I'm proud to say, a number of foreclosure defense attorneys like myself. Now, we're not just doing foreclosure defense. Again, what we're doing is trying to find a solution so that if you want to stay in the house, you can stay in the house. If you want to sell the house, a lot of our clients, they want to sell the house, but they can't because they're underwater and they can't pay off the mortgage. So they can't sell the house and relocate. There are solutions. There are options. You need to give us a call. We'll give you a free consultation. We'll go over some of your options and solutions, go over the cost. We'll tell you what to look for in hiring a foreclosure defense attorney. I'll give you the names of other good foreclosure defense attorneys. There's not many, but there are some, and I'll give you the names of other good foreclosure defense firms, because the thing is, the more and more people that are represented, everyone's going to need to be represented. And there's still 20 million Americans underwater, and they're going to need to be representation. The HUD counselors can only do so much. They are a great asset, the HUD counselors, but they can't do the legal analysis that is required. When you're hiring a foreclosure defense firm, you need to have somebody who's familiar with securities law, that knows about these audits, these investigation reports, that knows about securitization, that knows about unlawful inducement, deceptive inducement, fraud in the inducement, that knows about lack of standing, complete affirmative defenses, that has experience in litigation, and also has experience, and also works in conjunction with paralegals who apply for all the modification programs inside and out, all the rules and regulations for all the modification programs inside and out. An investigator who can track the securitization of the mortgage, can find who actually owns the mortgage, because the bank you're dealing with is just the servicer, and it's in their interest to keep you in foreclosure. That's why these whistleblowers came out and said that, there wasn't one or two of them. There's been 6 of them, and just with Bank of America alone. And then the week before it was Wells Fargo. We were told to lie to customers, to steer them towards foreclosure, to sandbag them into modification while the foreclosure's ongoing. And I've talked to at least 500 people that were in modification, and or they had an application for modification pending, or in a temporary modification, or just having a wonderful conversation with the modification person. And they were just being so encouraged and being able to sleep at night because that modification person had become their friend. Meanwhile, the bank was foreclosing in court, and they were getting a judgment, and they were putting the house up for auction, and then they were bidding their judgment lien at the auction, and then they were and then they finally would contact the homeowner and say, oh, by the way, you got 30 days to move out. Well, what happened to my mod? And then they can't find their modification friend. So anyway, we're going to take a little break.
You need to refax it in.
Yeah, right. You need to say, we've lost your documents. Are you sure you sent them? Well, we have ways of dealing with people like that. Anyway, we're going to break now for a little more sports and weather. Mike's going to read you the Facebook page, and thank you, everyone, for the support on the show. Mike, before
Facebook.com/The Lou Brydges Show. That's Bridges with a Y. Don't forget 224-513-1231. 224-513-1231. Questions? I really would love it if you'd go to the Facebook page and help spread the word. We want people talking about this, not just on Facebook, but at the dinner table, at the dinner parties.
Never give up the land.
Louis Brydges of the law firm Brydges & O & Associates, one of the leading foreclosure defense firms in the Chicago area, rejoins you now on the Lou Brydges Show. Here's Lou on how you might avoid foreclosure and deal with a mortgage that's underwater.
People, welcome back. And again, thank you, everyone, for all the support of the show. People that aren't even in foreclosure are calling in and saying, do keep up the good work. Just some more of the news reports reported here in the Charlotte Observer that shareholders of Bank of America want Bank of America to investigate ex-employees' claims. These are the whistleblowers. News from Bloomberg. Bank of America should face foreclosure probe by the TARP watchdog, Representative Maxine Waters says. In the Countrywide, New York Times, Gretchen Morgensen, who was one of the first reporters who got onto the story and should win, in my view, a Pulitzer Prize for her work in this field. She wrote Too Big to Fail along with Sorkin. Why do you talk about the Countrywide case? You see, Countrywide is perhaps the poster child of, not Countrywide, but Taylor Meade Financial, both of which have been put out of business for the fraud and the origination that they perpetrated. But Countrywide originated about 20 million mortgages during its time, and probably about 19,500,000 of those were based on fraudulent information and false information and errors and omissions and unlawful activity. The National Mortgage Settlement Monitor finds flaws in the consumer advocates crawl foul. Eric Schneiderman filed another lawsuit in New York, this time against Wells Fargo for failing to comply with time loan standards. And it just goes on and on and on. The U.S. versus Bank of America over the Countrywide loans, eliminating underwriting standards. You see, the whole notion that this whole thing came about because of liar loans or homeowner fraud is being disabused. That was something the banks perpetrated. There was a couple of liar loans. There was a few homeowners that were abusing the thing. There's a few investors that were abusing the whole process. But the vast majority, again, I've said many times, 20 million Americans and their spouses did not wake up one morning between 1998 and 2008 and decide, geez, I'm going to go out and commit bank fraud today. I don't think so. The vast majority of our clients, we've had a few that came in and said, you were really kind of manipulating the system, and, we think you maybe should go be represented by another firm. I mean, but certainly that's to be expected. I mean, when you have a situation in which the real estate is overvalued by the originators and the by the appraisers, and the originators will get, say the loan. Don't worry about getting the loan approved. It's already been approved. There's people that are going to take advantage of the easy money, but the vast majority of families just want to live in an area where they can have a nice home, send their kids to school, and live in their community where they go to church, where they go to the library, and where they have their friends and their relatives. And these are the people that we represent and want to represent, because these are the people that are getting really screwed by these big banks. And, this has been the largest transfer, on a big scale. This is of a major historical significance. This will be studied hundreds and hundreds of years from now, this whole era we're going through. And it's going to go on for another 5 to 10 years because there's still 20 million American families underwater. So it's really important because, Thomas Jefferson warned about this. These big banks and the corporations that grow up around them will take over and deprive the American people of their property. And they already have taken over the Office of Comptroller of the Currency. They've already, some people say, taken over the Fed. And they're acting in the interest of these big banks, not the American people. And Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, this Ed DeMarco was unabashedly in the banks. He had no notion that he was working for the American people. He was working for the banks and the banks alone. And damn the American people. He was asked many multiple times to start pushing for restructuring, pushing the servicers, which are editors they work for him. These banks work for the servicers to push them to restructure mortgages. And his answer was always no. You start restructuring mortgages and then everyone will want their mortgage restructured. Well, yeah. Everyone you're talking about is the American people, the people you work for, Mr. DeMarco, the people that you should be interested in, whose interests you should be watching out for. Whose interests are you watching out for? Who do you work for? Well, the answer wasn't the American people. It was the big banks. So, yeah, his answer was, we're not going to do that because that would be a good deal, and that would be a good deal for the American people, and we don't want to, but not a good deal for these banks that are servicing the mortgages. But, Mr. DeMarco, you work for the American people. We own Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, not the big banks. He didn't care. This is how arrogant these people have become. The representative from the Office of Comptroller of the Currency that approved this $3.6 billion pittance of a settlement for the abuses in the foreclosure process that haven't even been disclosed, but which we all know involve fraud upon the courts of our land. When he was asked by the representative of the House Banking Committee, the Joint House-Senate Banking Committee, was asked, what exactly was found? And he claimed a privilege. He said this is privileged information, part of an internal investigation. Well, let me tell you something about privilege from the law. Privilege is attorney-client privilege, priest, confessor privilege. Corporate privilege involves things like the recipe to Kentucky Fried Chicken. It doesn't involve the results of an internal investigation, or not even an outside investigation conducted by independent investigators that found that you had committed crimes. There is no privilege. In fact, you're probably going to be guilty of concealing, being an accessory after the fact of the crime if you don't reveal in response to questions from a Senate investigation committee. What crimes did these banks commit? Mike's going to have to give you the information.
Facebook.com, The Lou Brydges Show. That's Bridges with a Y. 224-513-1231.
We now return to The Lou Brydges Show, telling the truth about the foreclosure crisis and the greatest financial crime in history. Here's Lou Brydges, an attorney on the front lines of the ongoing battle for our land.
I love our announcer, but I got to get it straight. It's the greatest financial crime spree in history that continues to this day and is actually accelerating. The 12 major banks that service mortgages in this country, in conjunction with the Wall Street investment banks, that perpetrated the greatest financial crime spree in history that is ongoing, robbing the American people of their property and their land, and perpetrating the greatest transfer of wealth in human history to a very, very, very small few select number of people, probably less than 1,000. $5.5 trillion in transfer of wealth. Now, we ended last session. We were talking about some of the, I guess we've gone through all the news reports, and Mike has some questions that are typical questions we get from listeners, and what is, you go ahead with your question for the week. Listeners, by the way, send in your questions to the Facebook page, or call them in, or email them in, and we'll get to them. But we're not going to take live calls because we've got too much to talk about in too small of a time. And maybe
someday.
Maybe when the station was willing to cough up some bucks and go to 2-3 hours, we'll be able to take. But for right now, we're working on a budget. So go ahead, Mike. We only have an hour.
Okay. So a common question that I'm getting is: my credit is good and is important to me. and I'm making my payments currently, but I'm underwater and I'm barely able to make those payments. And I'd like to know an opinion about my personal situation here.
Well, again, we can't give specific legal advice on any situation because, there's always so many factors that are involved. But generally speaking, and again, this is why we provide the free consultations. What we do for people, what we'll offer for people like this particular person is underwater. Okay, maybe they've got a $250,000 house. It's worth $250,000, but the mortgage is $350,000. So they're overpaying by probably about $1,000 per month. That $1,000 per month, that $12,000 per year is things that they would like to use, for their family. But they can't sell the house either because, the payoff is $350,000 and it's only going to sell for $250,000. What can they do? Well, the thing to know, I always say, is stop and think first and then gather information. So what my partner, Scott O, and I have put together is rather than do a strategic default, because I know so many people, the gut reaction is, well, the only thing you can do is you're not going to get a modification while you're current, so you got to do a strategic default and apply for a modification with principal reduction or restructuring, a principal reduction of up to $100,000, and the bank may sue to foreclose, and there is the risk of you could lose your house. It could be 2-3 years, 4 years from now if we take it up on appeal, during which time you'd just be paying the monthly fee, but that would possibly damage your credit rating, although we do always object if we've got the basis from the investigation. So it's the investigation. You need to know what is the facts. So we offer this package now where we're not going to do a strategic default. You're going to continue to pay the mortgage. We're going to give you a flat fee. We're going to give you an initial consultation, go over all the options, and then have an investigation. Now, these investigations normally cost $1,000. I've prevailed upon the third-party mortgage industry investigators to provide it for $500. We'll get sort of a mini report. In other words, we'll look into everything involving the solicitation, application, processing, and serving and the origination of the mortgage, so forensic analysis. And then we'll also do the securitization analysis, in which we'll examine all the SEC filings and the Bloomberg terminal and the other data sources to find all the transfers of the mortgage, the MERS database and the Bloomberg terminal, track all the transfers of the mortgage to find what defenses, what points you may raise as a leverage to negotiate a restructuring, how strong a position you have. And we'll give an analysis of that, and we'll go over the reports with you. We'll give an initial analysis going over the whole thing. We'll get the investigations, the forensic investigation and the securitization investigation. And then we'll have another sit-down, hour too long, however long it takes, session in which we'll go over the results of the investigation and explain your options. Because most of the time we're going to find significant violations of law in the origination, in the inducement to sign the note and mortgage, which is going to give us leverage there. We're going to find probably failed securitization in just about in a vast number of cases. And the failed securitization is going to give us potentially, you may actually have a claim against the bank for collecting a debt that they have no right to collect. Because if there's been a failed securitization, it's very complicated. The servicing bank doesn't have a pooling and service agreement with the owner of the mortgage. They've got a pooling and service agreement with the entity, the trust, that the mortgage was intended to be transferred to. But if it wasn't transferred to this trust in accordance with the pooling and service agreements and the Declaration of Trust and the Securities and Exchange Commission regulations and the IRS regulations, well, guess what? It wasn't transferred. It's a void purported transfer, which means that trust doesn't own the mortgage, which means that bank that's servicing has a pooling and service agreement with that trust has been collecting a debt that they have no right to collect, which is a violation of the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act and the Fair Debt Credit Reporting Act, which means that you may actually have a claim against them. Now, when we've got this ammunition, now we know. Now maybe a strategic default is something that you want to consider, or maybe it's something we could just write to banks and say, look, we have this. We are going to not default. We are going to suspend payments while we renegotiate a modification of this, a reformation, which is something else in law, when there's been unlawful activity or deceptive activity, or there's a question whether one party can enforce a contract because they don't have standing. Well, the contract can be reformed, and that's what we're asking for. And while we're negotiating a reformation, we are going to suspend payment of the principal, interest, taxes, and insurance associated with this property until you agree to the reformation. So that's another option, and that's something that you might want to consider.
Facebook.com, The Lou Brydges Show. That's Bridges with a Y, 224-513-1231. Give us a call, interact with us on Facebook, ask your questions. We want to get them out there.
But whatever you do, people, do not just give up the land. This is very important. This is the future of us as a people. Never give up the land.
Welcome back to the Lou Brydges Show with Lou Brydges, one of Chicago's leading foreclosure defense attorneys. Here's Lou to tell you what to look for when hiring a foreclosure defense attorney and how to avoid being conned on AM 560. The Answer.
Welcome back, listeners. Lou Brydges here with Mike Main, my wingman, and we've been talking about the greatest financial crime spree in history and what's happening in our country today and what's being done to stop it. Because I do want to talk about, so people don't lose hope. There's still 20 million American families underwater, but Americans have a way of standing up and always responding to a crisis. And I think that that's starting to happen from what I see. And admittedly, I've been involved in this for 5 years now, since back in 2008 when the whole thing started. But we're seeing more and more that the truth, things aren't always as they first appear. And all around the court, we have one person who does nothing but follow the developments in all the courts around the country and then reports to the attorneys about those. We're finding more and more around the country, not so much in Illinois, but around the country, we're finding that the judges are recognizing that there's been a lot of unlawful inducement, fraud in the inducement, deceptive inducement in the mortgage, which gives the homeowner some rights, that there's been a failed securitization, there's a lack of standing, that the assignments were not done in accordance with the various state statute of frauds and in Illinois, the Conveyances Act, and that the homeowner has some rights, and that these banks are not all such good guys as they might appear from the commercials. And so we're seeing around the country more and more, particularly in the federal court system and in a lot of states, where homeowners' rights are being asserted. But it's like anything else. And it's just the way life is. You got to stand up and you got to fight. And that's something Americans have always done. And when it comes to truth and justice, you got to stand up and fight. My commercials, I say, are you facing foreclosure? Are you underwater? Well, you'd be not alone, because there's 20 million Americans in the same boat as you. And if you stand up and fight for truth and justice, I can guarantee you will be not alone. Because this is wrong. And this needs to be we need to bring the balance back. We have come too far to just give this country away to a bunch of coke-snorting, whoremongering Wall Street bankers. And that's what's happening. And, this judiciary works for us. There are judges. We constituted this court system, and we did not constitute the court system to be a foreclosure mill. We constituted it to dispense truth and justice based on the truth. And the law will follow justice, and justice will follow the truth. And we have the truth on our side. Because these banks, continuing to this day, are criminal enterprises for the most part. I mean, they're convicted of crimes all the time, and of these violations. These are violations of federal regulations. They're crimes, and this cannot be ignored anymore. The truth can never be ignored. It can be suppressed. It can be ridiculed. It can be opposed. But it will never go away, and and you do have that on your side. So if you're in foreclosure, if you're facing foreclosure, if you're underwater with your mortgage, do not give up the land. Fight for truth and justice, and you do that, and you'll never be alone.
Facebook.com, The Lou Brydges Show. That's Bridges with a Y, 224-513-1231. And FightIllinoisForeclosures.com.
Thank you for joining us. Keep those cards and letters coming and everything. We really appreciate the support, and looks like we are going to be going expanding the show soon.
You've been listening to the weekly radio broadcast of the Lou Brydges Show with attorney Lou Brydges, telling the truth about foreclosure. Have you received threats of foreclosure? Are you in a foreclosure right now, seeking a loan modification, considering strategic default, or any other legal action? Know and protect your rights, and do not give up the land. Lou Brydges' passion is to help you keep your home and achieve your legal goals. To receive a free consultation, which may help you decide how to defend against foreclosure, understand your options, and learn what to look for in choosing a foreclosure defense attorney, call 224-513-1231. That's 224-513-1231. or visit FightIllinoisForeclosures.com. That's FightIllinoisForeclosures.com. Get real answers from a real foreclosure defense firm and discover the legal tools at your disposal. Tune in to AM 560 The Answer next Saturday morning at 8 for the Lou Brydges Show, telling the truth about foreclosure.